Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Growth Show. We have Tom Pickering and David Berkeley with us today, and we're going to be exploring fixing the right problem, which is a follow-on from one of our last sort of podcast. So Tom, kicking off with you, fixing the right problem.
Yeah, I think, Nick, the interesting thing about this is that we're at school, we're always taught to be self-reliant and sort of have all the answers to the issues. It's very much the expectation. I think the reality is that actually very often I find in business that people fix the wrong problem. That said, and what do I mean by that? I'll give some examples which go back quite a long way, which is, the development of a vehicle. Should it have been steam or should it have been internal combustion engine? Actually, steam would have been better. The reason why it was internal combustion engine was because steam was thought was associated with heavy locomotives, and the classic statement from Henry Ford as well, that if he asked his customers what they wanted, he said, better horses, faster horses. Actually, would we have been better off with faster horses? Who knows? This is actually an EQ related issue, more recently, you can pretty common examples of things like the words that Trump or Biden use, where describing climate change as being a hoax. And false news. And what this does is it distorts and deletes activity. So the chance of Trump, therefore, or even his team addressing climate change, which we all know to be a serious issue, is 5x nothing. And I'm not singling Trump out because he's right or wrong. I'm just commenting on the dialogue and the importance of this. And I think another example as well maybe is around inclusivity, where Martin Luther King said, I dream that my little 4 children will one day live in a nation where will not be judged by the colour of their skin, but the content of their character. That was his dream going back a long time. And yet the distortion that we've currently got is that we've got NASDAQ companies deploying positive discrimination based on the colour of people's skin, and even worse, their gender and or sex in the old sense of the word rather than the new sense of the word. So maybe that's a bit of thought to kick the discussion off with.
All right, quite a bit in there. And David, why do we think you see people fix the wrong problem? Right, if we're identifying that the issue is usually not identifying what's right, what leads people down a path where they get fixated on maybe the wrong issue?
It's homeostasis. So the brain is fundamentally quite lazy. It'll find the easiest way to do anything. That's why we don't usually pick different ways to work. Well, when we were commuting, we didn't pick different ways to get to work. We just pick the easiest way, or the way we know best. The brain likes patterns, it likes regularity, it doesn't like things that disrupt it. And so often in business, people do what they were already doing twice as hard, then 3 times as hard, 4 times as hard, 5 times, and all it leads to is burnout, because you're trying to do the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Or they slightly tweak a marketing message or something, thinking that's going to suddenly be the silver bullet. And it's by and large because we're doubling down on an internal bet that we've already made. This is the right way. And when that doesn't work, we go, but we're smart people. So it does work, it just hasn't worked yet. So let's just keep doing it. Let's keep pushing through. Now, the cause of that quite often is because people spend far too much time in their business doing, as opposed to on their business strategically planning and seeing what's actually happening in markets and readjusting. I think anybody who's making a sort of 5-year business plan is probably a little bit ambitious in this day and age as to what's actually going to happen in markets, because we don't know with so much the technology and everything else what's going on and what 5 years is going to look like. So we kind of make these, we kind of build all our business strategies often off flawed thinking, or thinking that was right at a moment in time that actually has changed and evolved. So I think having more time on your business, strategically thinking through where you're trying to take it, what are the blocks, what are the problems that you're now facing, and why are they there, and what are you actually trying to achieve? That sound very, very basic questions, and most people roll their eyes and go, yeah, I know all that. Well, if you know all that, then why are you still making the same mistakes? So I think actually just stopping, being counterintuitive and stopping what you're doing and thinking about why you're doing what you're doing is probably a big step in the right direction.
Yeah, I totally agree. Tom, what other steps, what other processes do you look at to make sure you're actually on the right problem?
Yeah, very much concentrate on the dialogue, Nick. So I think David made some points there around thinking. We will do anything to avoid thinking because it's very, very hard work. And particularly when we're stressed, we will tend to drive in the rear view mirror. So, and actually that gets reinforced, which actually creates that trap that David just described of just doing more of the same, expecting a different result. So specifically, what I do is I train teams to pick up this dialogue. And interestingly enough, I was with one of the big four companies training some people this week, I'm pleased to say, and it's unbelievable how completely unaware they are of their internal dialogue. And the organisation is very much IQ focused. They employ very bright people who are expected to know all the answers, but in fact, they really look at the wrong thing. So I think I'd add to what David just said to say, actually, it's important we actually see the right issue. And I think it's all very well sitting down and planning a few years ahead, but actually, if you still can't see the right issue to fix, in other words, these types of statements I made earlier in terms of why did the locomotive, why does steam not get why was steam not deployed rather than an internal combustion engine? Unless people actually get that, which is really understanding around what's actually driving us, and it's our thinking that drives us, Nick. So changing thinking is quite difficult. So what I do as part of the development is actually to encourage people to take different perspective, and from that perspective, take different action. Actually changing thinking is quite difficult. The other way to change thinking is to change action. So, I have the privilege as a turnaround CEO to actually change people's actions because I have the ability to make decisions, some of which are popular, some of which are unpopular. But as part of a strategy, and actually in so doing, you're actually changing people's actions, whether they like it or not. And that then does change thinking. And as long as you do that with respect, but I come back to the point, it really, in the normal course of events, the chance of people actually thinking is 5/8 nothing because we operate based on patterns and a lot of what we've done in the past rather than, naturally we'll do a lot to it. We'll do everything we can to avoid thinking because it is literally very hard work. It's one of the highest energy things we can do, Nick. It's like running a marathon, thinking the whole body grinds to a halt. The amount of energy it requires to actually practical energy it requires to think is extraordinary.
Well, I think that's why I'm so slender. As I've done my hamstring and I've been able to run for a month, but I've lost weight, which is rare for me. But anyway, so David, on that process that Tom's outlined there, one of the issues is, as a management team, you're so used to working together that you're just not probably coming at this from a different set of angles, or there's blame somewhere right within that table, so people get defensive. What have you done to sort of help people work through that?
Well, on the blame point specifically, blame is a cultural problem because as soon as you're looking for someone to blame for a problem, you've got a far bigger problem than whatever you're trying to blame somebody for. Because all that's going to do is just shut down any kind of thinking. Because nobody's then going to be the person to go, I've got an idea that something new that we could do, that if it works, is going to mean that we do this. But then if it doesn't, everyone's going to go, well, you messed that up. So, that's your fault. It's your mistake. Out you go. So straight away, it just kills innovation. It kills thinking. It kills creativity and performance, ultimately. Because, any team that's kind of staying still is going backwards, as the old adage goes. So, if you're looking for people to blame, that's the problem. In reality, there's probably a whole load of people who you could blame. In fact, probably the entire team, because everybody was involved probably to a greater or lesser extent in the decision. What you'll then find is people go, I've got a new idea. What do you think we should do this new idea? oh, right, well, Bill thinks we should do this new idea. And Gemma, do you think, yeah, so Gemma does. And all you're doing is you're trying to shift the blame. So if the lightning hits you, you can just disperse it across the rest of the team, saying, well, I took it to Gemma, I took it to Bill, and they said it was great. So yeah, you guys, well, yeah, you're to blame too. And that is just absolute killer. So you've got to get away from the blame thing. It doesn't help. It's Conor McGregor, the UFC fighter, his coach, who's a pretty cool guy, he's got a great thing, which loads of other people adopted, and it's probably not his, but he always says it, which is we win or we learn. I think you should win and learn. But we win or learn, and therefore if you lose, it's not really a loss, it's just an opportunity to learn. And it's a cheesy saying and everything else, but if you can adopt that as a team, it helps so much. And then people aren't driven by fear of what could happen to them. They're actually driven by the excitement of what they could do together.
Yeah, I think that's good. Correct me if I'm doing this wrong, but when I've encountered grey areas where you can clearly see something sort of broken down, I'll bring people together and just take the first punch. I'm going to go, this is broken down, and that's on my watch. So look, this is my issue.
Yep.
And then try and set an environment where it's like, it's just about solving the problem now and how we come through this, rather than allowing blame. I'll just take all the blame. I'll just take it on the chin, say it's me, try and create an environment where it feels safe just to sort of throw ideas in there. Is that a dangerous strategy? Is that advisable?
I would humbly perhaps suggest you might want to put a 2.0 version on that, because that could then mean people act without impunity. So that right. if they make a mistake, because there are sometimes things that some things just don't work out for whatever reason, that's fine. But if someone's made a genuine mistake and you go, okay, don't worry guys, it's all on me, then all that can decrease accountability for what people then do. So it's a creative tension thing where you need to keep that kind of lack of blame, but also the accountability. People need accountability to drive performance. And so it's not necessarily of taking all the blame on yourself or whoever, but actually it's people being accountable for their actions. And one of the great ways to do that is just ask people, if we knew what we know now, what would we have done differently? It's actually disrupting their thinking patterns. So what have we learned from this? What have you learned from it? And what have we learned from it as a team? Because everybody will go, yeah, I probably should have flagged up that problem earlier, or yeah, I could kind of see it was going off topic at this point and I should have brought it back, or whatever it is. But that then means that people have their kind of individual ownership. It's a great leadership thing to take it on, but it often then doesn't help people to sort of take responsibility for their actions, sometimes in the wrong environments.
No. I think that's a great point. Like what I was ideally trying to do is create an environment for openness, then to later reattach to accountability. It's just that, as you were saying, those defensive environments for me they're the fears. That's when communication sort of stops. And Tom, based on what David's just said there, have you got any other ways to sort of encourage thinking, to encourage people to actually working in a different way to sort of solving a problem?
Yeah, so I think it's very important to depersonalize it, Nick. So it's either the process or it's the dialogue. More often it's the dialogue. So, I can recall plenty of situations. In fact, mistakes are the norm. With action, there comes mistakes, there comes learning. The far worse situation is there's no action at all. And I think if we make mistakes, we have to admit to them, and that starts. So in terms of unwinding blame, you have to adopt a very open stance and apologise openly to people. And I try to demonstrate that when I'm leading businesses. And I think the other trait of blame is it's very much this victim thing and taking no responsibility, which is actually one of the worst sort of psychological states. So actually taking no responsibility for what's going on around you, very dangerous. But again, I think so the focus is very much to move away from the person to the process and the dialogue. I think the other thing is, in terms of that type of dialogue, is also to make sure it's meritocratic. So when you were talking about that sort of openness, it's trying to assess those ideas based on not who said them or who's shouting the loudest, but on merit. And that's another thing, weighing up the sort of pros and cons of this stuff. I think there's a subtle difference as well, which is between assertive and aggressive. So I can remember a container being sent to the wrong port in the US for some automotive components, which is a monumental disaster, huge cost, millions of pounds cost, destruction, had to air freight parts across the pond. It was just disastrous. And the starting point of the boss is actually the bot. We put a new process in. The boss himself, actually, my managing director of the firm, I was the operations director, and he said to me, he blames my team, and in fact, it was quite clearly his fault. It's actually, but what I actually sent one of my junior guys to actually point out the part of the process that he actually got wrong, but then that disassociates it, focus on the process and the application of the process and it could have been anybody that got that wrong. It happened to be the managing director, who was by far the least likely person to admit to that mistake. So I think it's just watching the dialogue, Nick. I think it's focusing on process, moving away from people. So people start saying things like, well, you always do that. There's all kinds of, the flip side of this, there's all kinds of nasty tools that leaders will adopt, which is to draw generalizations out of isolated instances. So, there's a shortage or, that always happens, which is a very dangerous type of blame game that can take a whole life of its own, and it moves away from the specific issue to fix. And so I think it's that sort of dialogue, Nick. It's accepting that we are all flawed. I think the best place to be is actually to accept that actually we're all in the same boat. We're all pulling roughly the same direction, but actually, and we're all flawed. I think that's probably the best perspective to take in terms of, regardless of who you are.
I totally agree. I definitely agree with that sort of tolerance point around that always happens. I mean, that's a very weird thing to acknowledge and sort of accept within a business. David, so if we're working through identifying the problem, do we need new eyes on this? Like, what's the best way to do this? Do you find that you can usually solve it within the actual management team themselves, or it's important to open it up?
Well, there's a broad question.
There is a broad question.
With no obvious right answer. I think there is quite a lot of seeing the wood for the trees. So sometimes as when I go into an organization, sometimes the answer is glaringly obvious as to what the kind of blockers are, or what the language is around things of blame, or the wrong people getting fixated on job titles, or responsibilities, or whatever it is. The worst thing I can ever do as a coach is go in and go, well, this is the problem, because you're usually dealing with very, very, very smart people who, if you go in and this is something they've been wrestling with for 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, 12 minutes, whatever it is, and you come in and blurt out the answer, they usually end up thinking you're a bit of a prat, because the answer can't possibly be that simple because you've worked it out in 2 minutes or something. And it's not that that's necessarily the wrong answer. It's just that you've just seen it from a different perspective, or you've seen it many times before, whatever it is. That actually doesn't help people make change, and it also creates a crutch. So it means that every time there's a problem, then they'll go, "Oh, David, what do we do?" As opposed to beginning to think for themselves and take action. So that's where the kind of pacing and leading people to change thinkings and new outcomes is really important. Because if you tell people what to do, they never really listen, and they think you're a bit arrogant. And then you've given the right answer, and the last thing they're ever going to do is use it, which is the worst of all outcomes. Yeah,
it's fascinating. So most of the people I know in their businesses, they have a series of NEDs or advisors, and they pretty much wait till that monthly meeting to update them. And a prime example of this, this week I got asked to be an advisor to a business, and I was like, "Cool, what do you want me to do?" And they're like, "What advice?" I'm like, but why me? And they're like, well, you're good at advising. I'm like, well, maybe we should, before you pay me, maybe we should really understand what is going on in your business, so I can actually tell you if I'm going to add any value whatsoever within it, and actually just help them sort of work through that sort of process. And also just the fact that, you know, if you're going to engage with me, for example, for this, then didn't use me. I don't want to find a problem a month later because there's a contractual issue around it. Let's get into it sort of straight away, because I really think that those second pair of eyes coming in, where it's less politicized as well, potentially it's less dramatic, clear thought, really helps right now. Really helps.
Yeah, and a lot of the problems I'm hearing at the moment is based down to subjective opinion or subjective feelings on things. Look, we're driven by things. It's totally normal, but we're taking all that kind of baggage or historical relationship into a present situation and reacting to it, and it is reacting to the situation based on previous experience. Whereas for somebody external, it's sort of, well, you know, ABC. It's a lot easier, but you're coming, as you say, you're coming with this fresh pair of eyes and not carrying all that kind of relational damage or hurt of what people's done, or backstabbing, or, you know, even the great environments that people have where they go, we've always had a great working relationship. Yeah, but you've never been in a global pandemic together, so maybe that might have strained it. You know, or put a different pressure on it when you're not seeing that person every day, or whatever it is. And so, as you said, sometimes people just looking at it a bit more objectively from an external perspective can really help to draw out some of that emotion.
Definitely, because I've seen a situation where there's been, obviously it's a very emotional time. They're in a tough spot, and they won't make changes. They won't make the very clear, obvious changes because they think that might have a knock-on effect to lose staff. Where the truth of it is, they don't make changes, they lose all their staff, right? And having that external voice, I found, just came in and went, "This is the reality, and let's deal with that." And not having that context sometimes help, because you're going at a macro level. This is what you've got to do. Now let's work it back and give people time to actually process, you know, what that true reality is. Tom, what's the one bit of advice you give people starting out this process, where they know there's maybe a series of issues? Where would you point them on starting out? Where would you point them on saying that this is how I would take the first step to really working out the real problem?
Yeah, well, I think just on your point just then, Nick, I think the assumption that somehow someone comes from the outside is part of the solution. I think all they do is they bring their own thinking, which is undoubtedly different. But for how long? So how long, if you join an organisation, are you going to stay native, or how long does it take you to become native and blind to this situation? So every organisation has got a degree of dislocation, and I observe that the challenge is when the challenge and the actions get disassociated. So I articulated some of the reasons for that earlier. So I think to answer your question, Nick, I think it's a question of picking up the dialogue, because that's actually where that's actually where the issue is. And when you actually get to that point, then the problem becomes very easy to fix. And the challenge, I think, that a lot of people do, they're trying to apply IQ to an EQ-related issue. As a result, they fix the wrong problem, generate lots of work, and it becomes very hard work. And the EQ issue is still not fixed. So it can increase stress. So whilst I've got as much energy as most other people I've met, and I can drive things through, actually you can make your life quite difficult if you're fixing the wrong problem. I think the other thing is that as a turnaround CEO, the other thing I look for, which is absolutely critical, is everyone's thinking. So I need everybody to think, and that's because I need them to manage risk, Nick. So if they pick something up, I don't want to fix it myself. So and in fact, I've learned I'm not even the right person to fix it. Very often, even though I've got a fair amount of experience. So I think it's and when you get people working at the bottom, then they steer the ship as well, and you get that open communication. So it's very much down to having a heart for other people. It's about acknowledging people for being themselves. It's about very much a human thing, allowing them to speak up openly on any subject. Because if you even if you take something off the radar, whatever it is, you're actually going to bend that person out of shape across the board. And that's one thing that people don't understand. So allowing people to be themselves actually creates a far more predictable outcome. And yet there's fear associated with that. I come across quite a few HR directors who say, well, how on earth can you promote that person to run an operation when they've never done that before? And the answer is you've got to give people opportunities. And if you know how to engage with people, you can get a predictable result. If they're thinking, and if you get that right, it's just simply fantastic. It's really exciting experience, Nick. So I think that's really what drives me. So I think, it's about identifying the right issue, it's your EQ. And when you get there, then you can apply your IQ to fixing the problem. EQ identifies the problem, IQ fixes the problem. And when you stay on track, problems become very easy to fix. And the antithesis actually of that is that if you got the strategy wrong, and I think this is getting the strategy right is quite difficult for the reasons I just tried to describe. But when you get the strategy wrong, it's impossible to implement, right? So it's not even difficult to implement; it's actually impossible to implement because it's wrong. So you will just never do it. So you have to make the strategy live. You have to, to try and address the things I've just described, which are around the dialogue and not the EQ related stuff. And to be honest, I think this has been going for 40, 50 years. So it's a hugely unaware sort of territory that I'm finding very exciting. It's very exciting, but it's a monumental task at the moment, given the scale of the challenge that a lot of organisations face.
Yeah, I think a good question is how do you stress test that strategy, right? And most people are going, have got nothing usually in response to that. And right now, in these times where you've got to make critical decisions to push forward, like you said, wrong strategy at the wrong time is a very, very costly error. Yeah. It's key. It's key we get this right. Yeah. Maybe that's a subject matter for another time. But guys, that was great as always. Thank you so much for both your times today, and I hope for everyone at home listening in and watching. I hope that was useful, added value to content coming to you. We love doing these. We want to keep these coming to you. Thanks as always for all you lovely people who follow us on Spotify, YouTube. Smash that like button and help the algorithm find more and more people we can add value to. So thanks to you all. We will see you all again next week. Have a great working week and we'll speak soon. All the best.